Okay, let's start by getting grounded, and I'm going to invite you to just look around the space. This is my favorite grounding practice. So look around whatever space you're in and see if there's 5 things that you can see that you didn't see before this moment. Once you've seen those 5 things, close the eyes and see if there's 4 things that you can hear. See if there's 3 things that you can feel. Two things that you can taste. One thing you can smell. And then I'm going to start us off with the invocation to Patanjali. This is a chant that just kind of says, like, we call upon the wisdom of Patanjali. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharisya cha vaidyakena yo pakarotam pravaram munina Patanjalim pranjanaliranatosmi. Patanjalim pranjanaliranatosmi. Om. Just take a few more breaths in and out. And then let the eyes just flicker open, coming back to the space. Awesome. All right. So, welcome everyone. So, our agenda is we are going to talk a little bit about what the overview of each week is going to look like. I kind of already introduced that. We already did a check-in and a meditation before we started recording. I want to give you a little bit of a historical context of the Yoga Sutras, an overview to our books, and then we're going to look at Sutras 1.1 to 1.4 and then also 1.5 to 1.11. So that's just on a second slide. The class time's been lengthened out actually to fit in more than it used to be a shorter class. So that's why we're doing more sutras today than what was on the original slide. And this is our plan. We check in. It's an opportunity to connect as a group and see how the week has been. And then we'll do a meditation practice. And then each week we'll have a discussion around the sutras of the week. And I'll share one quick thing actually, which I wrote in the email, is that people ask which books they should get for the sutras. I have a big document which has like 300 pages of my work on all the sutras, and that is kind of what I'm often teaching off of or going off of. There's so many great books though. The Care Balkar one is like the official school text of Kaivalya Dham, which is my teacher's school in India. So that's one which I sent you guys. And then the Chip Hawcraft, I read it this year when I was doing it with Rolf, and I was like, this is the best, the most easy to understand one I've ever read. So that was why I added that recommendation. But I also just encourage people, like people tell me they have whatever book at their house, and I'm like, just read that one because it's just interesting what you share. That's different than what other people would share. And then we have really interesting discussions. So I'm not super strict on which one you want to read. Those are two I recommend. You could even do both, or if you have another one, you could bring that one too to the classes. So let's first start off with what is yoga. So in the second sutra of the first book, we find a definition of yoga, which every time I look at this, I see it's an error. It says Yoga Sutra 2.1. It should say 1.2. But Yoga Sutra 1.2 is Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And this is one of the most famously known sutras. And it says yoga is steadiness in the field of the mind or stillness in the fluctuations of the mind. So Patanjali's definition of yoga is striking. Yoga is a state of mind. That's it. And it's a psychological state where the mind is calm, at rest, and at still. And yoga is defined not by the condition of the body, but the condition of the mind. When the mind's at ease, the body is as well. And we can't feel physical stress without mental stress. And mental calmness results in a state of relaxation. Our inner state reflects our outer state and vice versa, as above, so below. So all things are connected and influence one another. And that's Alana Kaivalya. So I love this definition or this explanation. And I actually was sitting in a class yesterday about the asana in the Yoga Sutras. So they have this amazing professor that's come from India to teach at this yoga school I work at right now. And I got the Yoga Sutras taken off me as my subject material, but then I realized it actually means that I get to attend all her classes, which is so awesome. So I get to learn from her. And she was talking yesterday about how in the asanas, in the Yoga Sutras, the poses, they're actually not even referring to the physical poses. They're literally referring to the posture of meditation, which is so interesting. So this book is like yoga is literally all about what's happening in the mind. It's all about meditation. And then the book, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which came after the Yoga Sutras, gives like 15 poses. And what it sounds like, what most people say is that that was created as like almost like an add-on of like my body's uncomfortable, I can't sit in meditation. How do I sit? Oh, you need to prep the body by doing these poses. And so that's like the beginnings of yoga. And so they're 15 poses. They're mostly like floor based. It's a really random kind of combination. And then from there is where like all of modern yoga that we have today has grown. But the very original didn't have the yoga flows that we see today as part of the practice. So I thought that was really interesting that she said that. So why is studying the philosophy of yoga so important? And I love actually, Anne Marie, I didn't know that you were in that course at your yoga studio. I would love to ask you more about like what that's about because I haven't heard of a lot of modern studios doing a philosophy class. I think that's so cool. And even if it's just the yam and niyama, like the starting point, it's really of benefit to people for their mental health. And so this is a study at the University of Southern Mississippi. And basically they had two groups. They had one group just doing the poses, and then they had one group learning about the yamas and niyamas. And that group had significant decreases in anxiety, lower levels of cortisol. And the idea is that spiritual principles help you see meaning in your life situation, and that can lower your stress. And so that's why studying the philosophy is so important because it can actually change the way we're thinking, the way we're perceiving the world, the way we're experiencing life. So the poses themselves are of great benefit, but this is just a really great additional learning. I want to give you a bit of context into where yoga comes from, just so you can understand like where we're at with the sutras. So the very beginnings of yoga philosophy come from the Vedas. The word Veda means knowledge. And they're written between 3,000 to 6,000 years ago. And there's four main books: Atharva Veda, Rig Veda, Sama Veda, and Yajur Veda. And these are scriptures that were heard by sages, seers, and states of deep yogic meditation. And they are poetic, nonlinear, difficult to understand, and also, on the other hand, as simple, pure, and pristine as the rishis who received them. And yoga itself became more defined in the Upanishads, which include hundreds of philosophical texts with language that's less symbolic and more direct than the Vedas. So that's kind of the historical starting point. I would say with all these texts, it takes, or from my experience, it's taken me like many years just to master one. So I don't know a lot about these additional texts. I just know kind of where they are contextually. And Yoga Sutras has been my focus. And then hopefully I'll graduate onto some of the next ones. I am doing Bhagavad Gita studies right now, but I'm nowhere near at the place with Bhagavad Gita that I am with this text. So the Yoga Sutras is the focus of this course, and they were written or codified by Patanjali. It's often said codified instead of written, just to indicate that he didn't come up with this all. He didn't write it all. He just basically organized it and put it on paper. So he was a revered yogi, a scholar of many subjects, and they're said to be written like 2,000 years ago. And the word sutra means thread in Sanskrit. It's like a thread that strings beads together. So these are summaries of teaching, and they're designed to be remembered and recalled upon easily. So they're really good reminders for us as teachers and as students to expand upon. And they're written in Sanskrit, which is a vibrational language in which words have many layers of meaning and convey subtlety. So in translating the sutras into English, we sometimes lose subtleties, and those discussions are really interesting to discuss kind of the different meanings of potential things. And then the Bhagavad Gita is next, and this is the Lord's Song or the Song of God. And the Gita is a book on yoga, and this is something that it's kind of like the next step for me of studies, and so I've been doing them with my teacher Anvita now. And the Gita is basically a part of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a story. It's a big, big book. There's 18 books in it. And it's basically a story about this war between two groups of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And they've come to this battle. And there is this warrior, Arjuna, who is feeling at conflict with, like, oh my God, I don't want to be violent, but I have to fulfill my duty. I have to protect this land. And if I don't do this, then, it's going to be like a disaster for humanity. So he's in this moral conflict of like, should I fight in this war? Should I not? And this is when Krishna comes down in this God form, and Krishna basically has a dialogue with him. And the dialogue is the Bhagavad Gita itself. And that's one chapter of this whole book. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is basically teaching him how to meditate and how to calm his mind so that he can stay calm in moments of stress like this. And Vita, my teacher, would say to me that this is kind of like storytelling of all the concepts from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So if you've already done Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, you can kind of understand the concepts a bit better than if not. And it's said to be written 5,000 years ago, and it's often treated as a standalone text. It's considered as important as the Upanishads, and it describes various paths of yoga, including jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, karma yoga. It actually doesn't describe Raja yoga. This is incorrect. So that needs to be edited as well. But it basically teaches us these three paths to yoga. Jnana is the yoga of knowledge. So this is like studies, academic studies. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion. So like having faith in God. And karma yoga is the yoga of our action. So the action we do each day. All three of these have come together in Patanjali's teaching to form what Patanjali created as Raja Yoga, royal yoga, the path. And that includes all three practices. And I always thought that the Gita described all four, but actually it describes three, and then Patanjali took them and took all three of those and created a fourth, which combines all of them. So that's the context of the Bhagavad Gita. I have a copy of the Mahabharata here at the house, which I also have learned apparently you shouldn't have a Mahabharata in your house because it's a book about war. And yeah, apparently it's like an Indian folk tale that if you have it in your house, it could like cause conflict in your family. So my teacher says it's okay because I'm living by myself. But if I have a family, it should be like out of the house, basically. So that's the Gita. And then the very last one is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And this is the text I was telling you earlier. This almost seems like an addition onto the sutras of like, okay, how can we prepare our bodies to meditate? And it was written in the 15th century. The author was an Indian yogi named Swat Marama. And Swat Marama means one who delights in one's Atman, Atman being like your soul. So this text, unlike the sutras, it starts with the body and it describes the practices, the hatha yoga practices as a way to advance towards Raja yoga. So these are the poses, shatkarmas are the cleansing practices, mudras are different like connections, right, with our hands. Bandhas are like internal locks, and then pranayama are breath practices. So all of those are preparatory. And that is kind of the origin points of yoga philosophy. All right, so let's talk about the four different books of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So, actually, I'll also add something, which is that it's actually apparently one book with four chapters. But a lot of people in the English speaking world will say it's four books. So you're going to hear me switch back and forth between calling it book one or chapter one. And that's me just trying to recreate my knowledge now that I know, now that I've been corrected, that it's not four books, it's four chapters. And I obviously haven't updated this slide since I've learned that. But chapter one is the Samadhi Pada. And that's the one that we're going to be doing over the next 5 weeks. And this basically tells us what yoga is. It tells us the aim of the practice. It tells us the problems that appear on the path of yoga. It teaches us how to separate our identity from our thoughts. And it brings us to the idea of Purusha versus Prakriti. So that's chapter one. Chapter two is the sadhana pada, and this is all about how to attain consciousness. And this is where we learn about the mind suffering, how to live a yogic lifestyle. We learn about three paths of practice from the Gita, so body, mind, and heart, or jnana, karma, and bhakti. We learn about the eight limb path of yoga and the kleshas. So that's sadhana pada. And then Vibhuti Pada is book three. And this is where it gets weird. And you just have to let go and believe. And that is a quote from one of the courses I took, or one of the courses I taught. I wasn't in the class. My friend Jen was teaching this section of the book for me, but we had a student in the class who was really not, was very like kind of intellectual, scientific, and was saying, they just weren't grasping the concepts that were being taught. And Jen said, sometimes you just have to let go and believe. And that just became like the quote of the course. So this part of the study is basically talking about samyama, which is like meditation. So we're going to get into like the stages of meditation, how our mind changes during that process, and then the supernatural gifts that really dedicated yogis can get from this practice. So it's pretty unbelievable. It's pretty beyond what we know to be humanly possible, but it's super interesting stuff. And then in the fourth book, we learn about getting to Kaivalya, which is basically the end of the life and death suffering. You're basically the end of like being reborn. And the goal is basically to go to moksha or liberation, and it's the ability to discern between the mind and the spirit. Okay, so this is our syllabus, and basically, I have in here the chapter, the meeting date, and then the topics or sutras that we're going to be doing that week. So you're welcome to study them ahead of time. And one thing to note is that we are skipping 1 week because the advanced students are going to be in Bali and that's their first week. And Three of them are in this class. So we're gonna skip that week so that they can just get into the habit of the practice. And then the following 2 weeks actually line up with this is their changeover day where we're getting new people in for the second module. So I thought that was a good day for us to do this online class. And then this is actually the last day of the course. And so it's the morning of checkout time. So we're having normal classes in those 2 weeks, but then there's 1 week that we'll miss. And then the rest are all mapped in here in order. It goes towards the end of November, but as I was saying, sometimes it ends up adding on a week or two. So just be mindful of that. Okay. So let's start with the very beginning. So there's 4 sutras that are kind of like the summary sutras. They basically summarize what the whole book is about. And if you know how to calm your mind and you read these 4 sutras, then you probably could be finished with the whole text. But most of us don't know how to calm our minds, and that's why we need like so many additional sutras to learn. But the very first one basically says yoga is now. Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Atta means and so, now, and then yoga is origin, oneness, or eternal truth. And this I've also heard being translated as a couple other things. So my teacher Rolf recently said to me, he translates it as now I begin to guide myself. And I like this translation because he's basically saying like, okay, now you have to take on these practices on your own. I also heard a teacher say this years ago, and I don't remember who said it, so I feel like it must have been Tommy. I must have been sitting in a lecture or something because I can't find it anywhere online. But someone said basically, you've tried everything else. Now you need to try yoga. You've tried alcohol, you've tried drugs, you've tried junk food, you've tried like Netflix, you've tried everything else. Now you're going to try yoga. So there's several different translations of what that could actually mean or interpretations. But what it's basically saying is like, we're ready, we're starting. Yoga is the now. And I'm just wondering, what does that mean for you about being in the now? Do you struggle to be in the now? What are things that are difficult about not being in the now? And if anyone wants to share any thoughts they have or any. All right, I'm going to jump us to Sutra 1.2. And this is basically the definition of yoga. So this is the one that I referenced earlier. It's yogas chitta vritti nirodha. This is one of the most commonly known sutras. If you were to ask, like most people don't know about the sutras, but if you ask people like what they know about the sutras for people that do know, this is one thing that they might know. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. The other thing that they might know is the yamas and niyamas. That's the most commonly thing taught in 200-hour yoga teacher trainings. And that's coming into us in book 2. And then also I sometimes hear people referencing Sthira Sukham Asanam, which is the first sutra about poses. That poses should be easy, should have effort and ease. So this kind of falls into the collection of like well-known sutras, I would say. Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And the words here mean yoga, obviously yoga. Chitta refers to like our, no, this is not correct. Okay, Vritti is the fluctuation of the mind or the thoughts whirlpools. Chitta is not our thoughts or whirlpools. Chitta is like the container that holds our thoughts or our whirlpools. So that needs to be edited. So our chitta is basically like the container in our head, which I think I have another slide about that in a moment. And vritti are like the fluctuations of the mind, and nirodha basically means to control, to let be. So it is a normal human experience for us to have thought fluctuations. And I'll just speak to my experience, which is like I used to have like a ton of anxiety, a ton of mental health symptoms, which I still sometimes struggle with. And I feel like I was always just like beating myself up of like, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I'm feeling this thing or I'm thinking this thing. And the longer I do this work, the more I see that like all human beings have these whirlpools of the mind, in AA, we refer to it as like a washing machine brain. And they're always saying like people in AA have this washing machine brain. And I actually think that humans have a washing machine brain. Like humans have a brain that just like fling things around, right? And my example of this is like, this has happened to me so many times where I'll have a symptom, I will Google it, I'll convince myself I have a deadly illness. And I used to think that that was something that was evidence that that there was something wrong with me. And the more that I teach this, the more I find out that this is actually universal. And a lot of people have had that experience of like, oh, I have a symptom. I'm going to Google it. Now I've diagnosed myself with this thing, right? And so, what this is basically saying, this sutra is saying that it's normal. Like, it's normal to have these fluctuations of the mind. It's normal for our mind to come into whirlpools or thoughts. And let me see if I have this slide here. No, it's missing. Okay. I'm going to see if I can pull that up in 1 second. That explains like the breakdown of the chitta. But I'm just going to stop myself there and ask um, if there's anything that you can connect to or relate to on this concept of like the whirlpools, the thoughts in the mind. Okay. So this is kind of like a basic explanation of the chitta. I saw this from Simon, who I work with at this yoga school. He gave me this diagram and I just think it's so useful. So this is basically saying that our chitta is made up of these three things. Our chitta has our mind, our manas, our intellect, which is our buddhi, and our ego, which is anakar. These are all in the chitta. This is our soul, our purusha, our true self. We all have this like soul within us, but the chitta is like the perceiving mechanism to perceive the world. And through those three things, our ego, our intellect, and our mind, all these thoughts are generated, our vrittis, our thoughts. And this is basically the material world in front of us. So I put just random things that we see every day, like a butterfly, a flower, and a fire. And this is like prakriti. These are like the objects of the world. And basically, our mind generates all of these thoughts, which basically obstruct us. Like basically, all of this stuff is in the way of us just seeing the world as it is. Like this is a butterfly, a flower, and a fire. And that is just it. But we have all these thoughts which get projected onto the things of like, oh my gosh, what if this fire grows and burns down my house? And then, this happens. Or, I have this identity of like what I think about flowers, or maybe there's a bee in the flower and I'm afraid of bees. And there's this is all like my thoughts around what I'm seeing in front of me. I have this real connection to butterflies right now. And I have like a spiritual connection to butterflies. But when I see them, I will go on this narrative, which is a positive narrative, but it's just about what the butterfly represents to me. So this is what the chitta is. The vrittis are basically the thoughts we generate around the world that we see. And all of this is like in the way of basically our true self, just seeing things as they are. What questions do you have or thoughts on that diagram? It's like if you imagine like a lake. And there's all these things at the bottom of the lake, but there's like waves in the lake. So you can't see through the waves to see what's actually at the bottom. And the thoughts are like those waves. The water just isn't clear because there's all this stuff. And then as soon as we're able to like still the water, then we can see what's underneath. Sutra 1.3. So basically, in what we've seen so far, we've seen like, okay, we've seen yoga as the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Sutra 1.3 says, Tada drashtu svarupe vastasanam. So then the true seer abides in his own nature. And this is basically the result of yoga. Okay, so if we're in our practice, the sand settles, the water clears, we start to see that the prakriti is not us. Like the prakriti is here, we are the soul, and we're just like enmeshed with it all. We're just mixed up with it all. And so Sutra 1.3 is basically the moments of insight. Tada drashtu svarupe vastasanam. It's when you like sit into yourself and realize like the truth of the way things are, the results of the way things are. And that is really what we get through our practice. And so when I'm in my own practice, when I'm regularly practicing, I am able to disengage with a lot of like the chaos of my life. And when I'm not practicing, my thoughts spiral more, you know? So when I'm in my meditation practice, the sand basically settles, the water clears, I have these moments of insight, and I start to separate between these two concepts, Purusha, Prakriti. And if not, they're just entangled together. And Sutra 1.4, Vritti Sarupam Itaratra. So this one is a warning of what's going to happen if you're not regularly practicing yoga. You are going to start to identify with and become your thoughts. But you're not your thoughts. They're just things that are passing through your mind. um, I gave this example. That's so funny that I have this example because I feel this every time a yoga retreat or training ends. I get really sad. I just feel like I'm just, because I'm pulling out of being in spiritual community, I'm recalibrating. And that can feel really sad to me. And the reality was like I wasn't practicing, I remember this time when I got home and I was just like in my little like house on the beach by myself, and I wasn't engaging with community. So of course I would be feeling depressed and lonely. And then I think it was like 3 days of this and then I drove out to teach yoga at the studio I work at and that was it. It was like I just need to do the practice and get into community and that's going to shift things internally in me. So we start to identify with and become our thoughts. We see these like passing thoughts and we think that they are who we are. So these are those first 4 sutras, and they can basically be a summarization of like the whole text, the summarization of the most important things. I'll just write them in the chat, which are the first one is 1.1, yoga is now. The second one is yoga is stilling the fluctuations of the mind. The third is yoga is, third one is when we don't practice, we identify with our thoughts. Oh, sorry, that's 1.4. 1.4 is when we don't practice, we identify with our thoughts. 1.3 is then when we practice, we see our true nature or true selves. So yoga is now, yoga is just stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. When we practice, we see our true nature, our true selves. When we don't practice, we identify with our thoughts. Okay, what questions do you have about those before we jump into the next section? So this section of the sutras that I'm about to jump into, it was my favorite this year. And so Anne Marie has already done this workshop, I think, with me 3 times. Sarah probably like 15, maybe. And if you've been reading my Substack, you've probably also seen me write about this. And the reason why I'm so obsessed with it is because I think it's the most useful thing I've maybe ever learned in my life, possibly. And yet I still have times when I live it imperfectly. I'm aware of this functioning of my mind, and yet there's times when I still get lost in it, such as this week. So Vritaya Panchataya Klishta Klishtaha. So that's Sutra 1.5. Vritaya refers to the fluctuations or misconceptions. Panchataya means 5-fold. So pancha means 5. Panchataya means 5-fold. Klishta means harmful, burdensome, afflicted. And aklishta means harmless, carefree, or unafflicted. So our thought patterns can be broken into 5 categories that are either harmful or harmless. There's 5 different types of thoughts that can be painful or painless, and our practice is cultivating awareness around these thoughts and learning how to identify them. So Yoga Sutra 1.6 outlines the 5 fluctuations or vrittis of the mind. And this sutra says pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smritaya. So there's basically 5 fluctuations of the mind. Number 1 is right knowledge, and this is something that's based in reality. So if we see, hear, taste, touch, or smell something and it's true, it's considered right knowledge. So anything that's true is right knowledge. So example from I'm going to give you an example from yesterday. So I have this kitten who is like this big, right? And I lost the kitten at one point yesterday. And what happened was the kitten was just like hiding behind under this bedside table. And then I was like, okay, I need to get this kitten into its crate because the doctor says that it should be sleeping in its crate. So I'm going to just like get rid of all the books in the shelf and then open up the drawer and empty everything out so that it's light enough that I can lift it. And by the time everything was out, and then I lifted the table, the kitten wasn't there. And I was like, what the heck? Like, where did this cat go? Because this cat's been under this table for like hours. And so I start searching around the house, looking for the cat. And the right knowledge is that the cat is not there, right? Viparyaya is a thought based in misperception. So, like, if I'm misperceiving something, like if I think the coffee I'm drinking is decaf, but it's actually caffeinated, I'm going to know that because I'm not going to be able to sleep at night, right? Um, so I'll tell you I'll give you the cliffhanger, which is that the cat was actually in the bedside table. The cat had like basically when I opened the drawer, Ziru had like hung his body over the drawer thing. And I only noticed because I opened the drawer again and I was like, oh my God, there's an eye in there. Like I could like see this eye in the side. And then I was like, oh my God. So it was wrong knowledge, right? The wrong knowledge was that the cat was not in the bedside table or under it because the cat was actually there. And that was a misperception that I couldn't see. Like I had shut the drawer and couldn't see that the cat was still there, right? And the cat is so funny because his legs were just dangling. And so obviously I had picked it up and didn't see like the legs in there. So the kalpa is our imagination, okay? Because now I'm just like, oh my God, because I can't imagine how an animal could hang over like the thing of a drawer with not being injured, right? As the drawer opens, like I'm like, how is this cat? So now my imagination is like, oh my God, this cat is probably injured. It's probably hurt. I have to like bring it back to the vet to whatever. And that's the imagination. This is like this whole mind spiral thing. It's all happening in this really short span of moments, but I'm like, oh, blah, blah, the cat, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I end up being able to get the cat into his crate and he's just normal, like I don't see any blood. He's running around, he's jumping. I'm like, okay, this cat was fine. Right. But my imagination was all of the pain that this cat could potentially be in or the imagination that I lost the cat. I have to go back to this villa and say that I've lost this cat after like 3 hours of having it. Now, Nidra is sleep. This is a human need. It's also a category of thought. We also experience dreams, which are our mind sorting through what's occurred in our waking life. This is so interesting to me. Because I used to never have dreams. And this year I started having lots of dreams. And now I feel like my dreams were just sorting out kind of like my traumas or my experiences or my life. I had a dream the other night that before Zero got here, so like 2 nights ago, that um I was sleeping in the guest room because there were mice and I had this dream that like my cat wasn't fed, even though my cat passed away like 6 weeks ago, but I woke up literally at the door trying to open the door to like go get to my cat, right? And that is rooted in like a reality. That's my brain just like processing probably the loss of my cat, right? And so nidra is when we're sleeping, when our brain is either unconscious or when it's processing things happening in our life. And also our sleep affects us, right? If we get too much sleep, too little sleep, it affects our life. This one is kind of the anomaly in this particular workshop because we don't necessarily have nidra in our waking moments. But the very last one is smritaya or memory. And this is the stuff that we hold on to from our past that shapes our present. So it can be anything positive or negative, any stories, like the trauma we've experienced, like a divorce, a death, a challenging relationship, any memories that we hold on to can cause us pain if we can't let them go. And this is like the starting point of the sutras. We think about the mind because we have to just recognize the mind for what it is. We aren't these thoughts, we have thoughts. And if we learn to witness our thoughts, then we can just navigate them and discover our true selves. So these are these 5 thoughts: pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smritaya. And then the next sutras talk about each one in detail. So 1.7 is right knowledge, pratyaksha, anumana, agama, pramanani. And this is basically saying that right knowledge can come from our sense perception, logic, or testimony. And so I gave an example of this in one of the yoga teacher trainings I was teaching on. I had this student in the group who really liked working out at the gym. And the very first time I was teaching right after lunch, and so he was going to the gym on his lunch break. And the very first time he went, he texted me to say that he couldn't get a taxi back to the school. And so that was like his testimony, right? His testimony was saying that he couldn't get a taxi back, and he was a trustworthy source. I'm like, I believe that that's what's happening right now. The next day, he didn't text that, but he wasn't there, right? And so through what I'm perceiving, he's not there. I can use logic and just say, okay, he's probably at the gym again, trying to get a taxi back to the class. And so that's what it means by like, we can have someone tell us something if it's a trustworthy source. We can also just see something that's true. And then we can use our logic to understand right knowledge. So that's 1.7. 1.8 is wrong knowledge. Viparyayo mita janam adrupa pratistayam. So wrong knowledge is established in something that's not from nature. So basically, wrong knowledge is a misperception. So a misperception would be like if this guy hadn't texted me to say that he was late coming back to class and I see him missing and I all of a sudden go on this spiral of like, oh, he's dropping out of the course or he hates this class or whatever, that would be a misperception, right? It's not rooted in truth. Now, imagination, shabda jana anupati vashtu shunyo vikalpa. So imagination are words devoid of an actual object. Imagination can be a really good thing, right? If we have children who have really wonderful imaginations. Imaginations are what have got us beautiful music, books, TV shows. Those all come from imagination. So imagination is a great vritti, a great whirlpool. Imagination can also cause us problems, right? If we start to imagine some of the things that are happening in our lives, we start to imagine like this thing happened or that thing happened, and it's not rooted in truth. It can make us make choices. It can make us have reactions. It can lead us to do things that we wouldn't have otherwise done, right? And so having an awareness around like what is actually rooted in truth and what is in our imagination is super helpful. 1.10 is abhava pratyaya alambana tamovriti nidra. So deep unconscious sleep is the absence of fluctuations. And then the last one, 1.11, memory, anubhuta vishaya asampramosha smriti. So from that experience, memory is basically a thought spiral that comes to us from just an imprint in the mind that doesn't have like an object of the senses in real life, right? So we all know what memory is, like when we're holding on to something from our past. All right, I'm going to jump us to this activity. But first, before I do that, I want to pause and ask, does anyone have any questions or thoughts about any of those that have come up or any like awarenesses. Awesome. Okay, so I have this activity for you. And this is what I think is super helpful. So basically, this is a practice that I do all the time when my mind is spiraling, which happens all the time, and I realize I'm spiraling. I basically try to categorize what's happening in my brain as to whether it's right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, or memory. So I want to give you this activity for, we have 10 minutes left, so we can journal for about 5 minutes and then share. Which of these thoughts of experiences you had are right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, or memory? And don't worry so much about getting things in the right category. I get asked that question all the time when I do this. And it's more about just like finding awareness of the things that are not right knowledge, right? It's more about finding that awareness. I'm gonna grab myself a pen. Let's take like another minute just to write out our thoughts. And then I'm going to stop the screen share and also stop the recording so that people feel like they can share whatever they